The next morning, Specimen 2 stirred at an ungodly hour. I lay naked beside him, snuggled up against his lean torso, his wrists and ankles shackled to the bedpost as he slept. I decided to let him have one last night of natural sleep before I started the programming. When he lurched awake, I sat up. He looked over at me and tried to talk, but he couldn't because he had a ball gag in his mouth. My head was swimming. The hour was so early. But it didn't take long for me to focus. After all, this was the moment I had prepared for. Early morning rays of the rising sun glinted through the barred casement windows, casting orange lines across his face. His eyes were wide in terror as he pulled at the restraints. I calmly stood and went over to the nightstand. I opened it and retrieved one of my pre-filled hypodermic needles. At first I attempted to calm him by stroking his chest. He stopped jerking and lay fearfully under my touch, eyes wide like an animal caught in a leg trap. "Don't worry, everything's gonna be fine," I told him. He shook his head no, and his muffled attempts at screaming only served to create some saliva dripping from the side of the gag. I wiped away his drool with the bed sheet. "You're so very lucky to become one of the chosen few," I told him. "You'll see." The needle went into his arm easily, and soon the serum worked its way through his system so that he could relax. And as I did with Specimen 1, I unshackled him and lifted him from the bed while I lined it with the sterilized plastic sheets and coverings. He was nearly half the size of Specimen 1, in body mass, that is. He probably didn't weigh more than 125 pounds. And as with Specimen 1, I posed him in the rescue position. After the bed was prepared, I lifted him back onto it. I didn't even need to get the stretcher, as he was easily within my bench pressing range. The shackles weren't necessary, as he'd be out for a long time. I checked the monitors in my lab and saw that Specimen 1 was still asleep. Any sane mortal would be, except these athletes who had to jog at dawn. Never could understand how early morning jogging was better than any other time of the day jogging. But that's how that athlete rolls, and I was ready for him. While he lay comatose, I hurried up to my own bedroom and took a hot, steamy shower. Once I was clean, dry, and awake, I slipped on one of my lab coats and returned to his room. The lab equipment was set up as before. Electrodes, monitors, oxygen. I worked quickly, making small incisions in his head, his torso, his genitals, where I inserted the tiny implants. When they were all in place, I cleaned him up and sterilized his wounds and changed the bedding, and all seemed to be in order. I studied Specimen 2 with great fondness, staring at the droplets of blood that marked his initiation into my experiment. He breathed easily as the sedative coursed through his system. With a grin, I slipped the headphones around his ears. When sound started pouring into his unconscious mind, I adjusted the frequency on his on my handheld device, and I put the calculations in my notebook, of course, the other notebook. Athlete, no drinking, no smoking, no body fat, and so it goes. He was so sweet lying in his bliss, his stigmata gleaming in the sunrise. He stayed like that for a few days.